The storm reached Dunmere late, rolling over the moors with a low rumble that made the house seem smaller than its tall stone walls promised. Wind pressed against the shutters in sudden bursts, as if something outside wished to be let in. The lamps along the front path quivered under the assault, their flames bending into thin, trembling lines. Inside the manor, the servants moved as though stepping through a dream woven from unease. Every footfall softened, every spoken word lowered. Even the clatter of the kitchen had gone still, replaced only by the occasional hiss of the fire and the restless sigh of the house settling under the weight of the storm. Yet none of those sounds held the staff as tightly as the thin, high cry drifting down from the nursery floor. It pulsed through the hallways in irregular waves, starting sharply, falling into silence, then rising again with aching desperation. The kind of cry no one knew how to soothe. Near the back entrance, where the wind slipped through the smallest cracks, a young woman stepped inside, clutching her cloak around her shoulders. Rainwater slid from the hem of the garment and pooled near her boots. She blinked at the dim corridor ahead, taking in the rows of closed doors and the hollow air that seemed to swallow sound. "Elara Wynne?" a voice called. She turned as the housekeeper approached, a lantern in hand. The light curved across the woman's lined face, and the keys at her belt. "Yes, madam," Elara replied, straightening, despite the cold biting at her bones. "I was asked to report tonight." "You cut it close," Mrs. Brand said, though not unkindly. "Come. The master is not to be disturbed, and the storm will worsen." Elara followed her down the corridor, the lantern's glow stretching their shadows along the walls. The crying above faded for a moment, then returned, raw and thin. She hesitated. "Is that the child?" Mrs. Brand did not slow. "You will understand soon enough." They climbed the main staircase. Portraits watched from the walls, their dark eyes made bolder by the flickering light. Most were ancient, but one painting stood out, newer, brighter. A woman with warm eyes and soft features. Her gaze lingered even after Elara passed. "That is Lady Isolde," the housekeeper said quietly, noticing the girl's glance. "The mistress of Dunmere." "Was," she corrected herself after a beat. "She passed 8 months ago." Elara nodded, though the ache hidden in those few words lingered behind them like a shadow following up the stairs. The nursery door stood partly open. Warmth seeped out, along with the faint scent of lavender. Inside, a nurse bent over a cradle, her shoulders squared as if bracing for another onslaught of sound. She turned the moment they entered. Her tired eyes swept over Elara quickly, assessing her without sentiment. "You are the new girl." "Yes, Nurse Katrin." "There is no time for ceremony," the nurse said, adjusting the blanket inside the cradle. "You will help with tonight's watch." "The child?" Her voice caught slightly, though she masked it with a brisk clearing of her throat. "Lord Arlen sleeps, but it rarely lasts." Elara moved closer. The boy lay still, his lips parted in small breaths, a shadow of tension lingering on his brow even in slumber. His lashes curled delicately against cheeks flushed from earlier distress. "He is beautiful," she whispered. Nurse Katrin gave no reply. Instead, she motioned to the adjoining room. "Your bed is there. You are to remain within call, and you must obey the rules without fail. No sudden sounds, no humming, no rattling toys, no bells." Her voice hardened. "No music of any kind." Elara raised her head. "Music frightens him?" "Frightens is too pale a word for what it does," the nurse murmured. "You will understand when it happens." Before Elara could ask more, footsteps approached, slow, heavy, each one carrying the weight of authority and grief. The door swung wider. A tall man stood on the threshold, his coat damp, his dark hair tangled by the storm. His eyes, shadowed and striking even in dimness, swept the room as though searching for something that eluded him. Elara felt the air tighten. The Viscount of Dunmere, Lord Rowan Ashcombe. He stepped inside with careful quiet, his gaze moving first to the cradle. Only when he saw his son sleeping did his shoulders ease, though the relief in his expression looked painfully brief. "You are the new maid," he said without preamble. "Yes, my lord." "Are you capable?" The question held neither warmth nor challenge. It was simply the voice of a man who had asked too many people for help and received too little in return. "I hope to be of service," Elara replied, trying to steady her breath. "If you will have me." His eyes searched her face with an intensity she had not expected. Not suspicion, something nearer to desperation thinly disguised as scrutiny. "He cries at the slightest sound," Rowan said softly. "Even those barely audible to others. His mother shielded him from everything. Since her passing," he stopped. Not abruptly, but as if the words had run out of him. Nurse Katrin stepped forward. "My lord." He has rested for only a short while. If we disturb him, I will not wake him." Rowan approached the cradle, placing a hand on its edge. His expression softened in a way that brought a faint sting to Alara's eyes. Love wrapped in mourning. "What happens to him," Rowan murmured, "is not a matter of superstition. I do not believe in curses." Catherine's mouth pressed tight, but she said nothing. Alara, drawn by something she could not name, asked softly, "What do you believe, my lord?" Rowan lifted his gaze to hers. The storm muttered outside, and the candlelight trembled between them. "I believe my son suffers," he said, "and I cannot save him." The honesty of it made Alara's heart clench. A faint chime drifted through the manor, so light she almost missed it. Perhaps it was the clock downstairs, or the shifting of pipes. Barely a note. But the child stirred, his tiny fists clenched. A soft moan pushed past his lips. Rowan froze. "Not now," he whispered. The sound came again, distant but unmistakable, a single metallic tremor, as though something small had vibrated against wood. Arlen's face twisted in silent agony before the cry tore from him. Nurse Catherine rushed forward. "My lord, we must—" But Rowan had already stepped back, pained as if struck. Alara moved on instinct. She gathered the child in her arms with steady care, holding him against her shoulder, rocking slowly. He trembled violently, the cry breaking and reforming in sharp gulps. She murmured gentle, meaningless sounds, barely more than breath. Gradually, the storm smothered the last trace of the chime. Arlen's cries faltered. Alara felt his tiny fingers curl against her collar, clinging. Rowan watched, unmoving. When the baby finally fell quiet in her arms, the Viscount exhaled, long and ragged. "You may keep your position," he said, voice low, "if you can endure this." Alara nodded, still holding the child. Rowan left without another word, as silently as he had entered. Only after the door closed did Alara notice, sitting on a small table beside the cradle, a wooden music box. Carved. Beautiful. Shut tight. It had not been mentioned. It did not appear harmless. Yet something about it felt expectant, as though it had been waiting for someone new to notice it. Alara swallowed, a chill slipping down her spine despite the heat from the fire. Something was very wrong in Dunmere Manor, and the music box, silent though it now was, felt at the center of it. If you want to discover why Dunmere's child screams whenever the slightest note touches the air, subscribe and share your thoughts below. The heart of this mystery begins to stir. The storm had passed by dawn, leaving behind a bruised sky that lingered above Dunmere like a fading threat. The manor felt heavier in the early light, as though the walls themselves remembered the cries of the night and preferred not to wake fully. Alara had slept only in intervals, her rest broken whenever Arlen shifted or whimpered. By the time Nurse Catherine stirred from her chair, Alara was already up, straightening the small cot where she had dozed between hours. "You managed him longer than most," Catherine said as she washed her hands at the basin. "Some girls flee after a single night." Alara folded her blanket. "I am not frightened of work." "It is not the work that drives people out," the nurse murmured, drying her hands. "It is what they imagine." Alara did not press further. The hush settling over the house carried the remnants of unspoken stories, and she sensed that forcing them open would only breed mistrust. Instead, she glanced at the music box resting motionless beside the cradle. "What of that?" she asked quietly. Catherine followed her gaze but did not move closer. "Leave it. It belonged to her ladyship. Does it still play?" "Not anymore." The nurse's tone shifted, becoming guarded. "And it must stay shut. Do not let curiosity lead you astray. This house keeps its peace only when certain things remain untouched." Alara felt the warning settle coldly inside her, but she nodded. It was too early to reveal how sharply she had noticed the faint chime from the night before. Arlen stirred then, a faint rustle beneath his blanket. His lashes fluttered open, revealing dark eyes that blinked at the dim morning light. He did not cry immediately, which surprised her. Instead, he gazed upward, his expression a fragile mixture of confusion and caution, as if the world was something he had learned not to trust. Alara approached the cradle. "Good morning, little one," she said softly. The child reached toward the air, not in joy, but with a kind of timid searching. She lifted him, mindful of every small movement. He relaxed slightly, resting against her shoulder, but the tension in his limbs had not fully gone. Catherine prepared his bottle, glancing occasionally toward the doorway. "His lordship rarely comes at this hour," she said, more to herself than to Alara. He avoids watching the boy struggle. Alara fed Arlen in silence, marveling at how quietly he drank. No coos, no playful sounds, only soft breaths between swallows. It felt as if sound itself was an enemy to him, something he had learned to shield himself from. Once he finished, she lifted him upright, patting his back gently. He looked up at her with wide, solemn eyes, studying her face with an intensity unexpected from a child his age. "You see everything, don't you?" she whispered. A faint twitch at his brow answered her, as if some distant echo had disturbed him. She held her breath and listened. Nothing, only the slow shift of the wind outside. The moment passed, and he settled again, small fingers curling around the edge of her sleeve. When Katrin returned to the cradle to change the linens, Alara carried Arlen around the room, careful not to step too heavily. Sunlight slipped through a thin line in the curtains, illuminating motes of dust that drifted lazily in the air. Arlen stared at them with curiosity, mesmerized by the tiny floating specks. His tiny hand lifted, trying to touch light that moved away from him. Alara smiled softly. "That's better, isn't it? Quiet mornings suit you." But the quiet changed suddenly. A faint click echoed from the hallway, just the latch of a distant door closing. Nothing more. Yet Arlen stiffened in her arms as if struck by an icy wind. His breaths quickened, then stopped altogether for a single suspended moment. "It's all right," she whispered quickly, rocking him. No harm meant. He turned his face into her shoulder, trembling. It took several minutes for the tension to drain from him. Katrin watched from across the room. Her expression softened a little. "He knows sounds no one else notices," she said. "It has been this way since she died." "Was he like this before?" Alara asked. The nurse paused. "Not quite. He startled easily, but he soothed quickly. When Lady Isolde still held him, nothing seemed to trouble him. After her passing, it was as though the world became louder." Alara glanced again at the music box. Its carved lid caught the thin light from the window, throwing a faint sheen across its surface. "Did she play it for him?" Alara asked. "Every night," Katrin said, lowering her voice. "A gentle tune. He would fall asleep before it finished." A shadow passed across the nurse's face. "But after her death, none of us could bear to open it. Lord Rowan refused to touch it. He said the sound would make him think she had only just left the room." Alara considered this. "And since then, no one has laid a hand on it," Katrin answered. "Not even to clean it. His lordship said it must remain as it was." Alara took in that information with a measured breath. The box, silent for months, yet the night before something inside had trembled, something faint enough to escape notice, yet sharp enough to wrench a cry from the child. She shifted Arlen in her arms. "May I step toward the window? He seems calmer when he looks at the light." "Go on," Katrin said, "but keep the curtains mostly drawn. Too much brightness unsettles him." Alara moved to the narrow gap where sunlight spilled through. The child's eyes widened with wonder as he watched the shifting line of gold on the floorboards. His small hand stretched toward it again. "There," she murmured. "A world without noise." A floorboard creaked in the hallway. Arlen whimpered, burying his face once more. Alara frowned. "He feels every small thing." "Yes," Katrin said, "and the worst of it is that no one knows why." Alara quieted him slowly, walking in small circles until the tremble left his body. Her thoughts drifted inevitably back to the box, silent now, innocent in appearance, but she could not dismiss the memory of how it seemed to hum beneath the storm's breath. When Arlen calmed, she returned to the cradle and laid him down. He curled slightly, fingers resting against his own cheek. Katrin folded a blanket and set it aside. "His lordship will expect your report later. Speak plainly, but do not alarm him." "I will be careful." The nurse studied her with a sharper gaze. "Do not make the mistake many newcomers do. Do not assume there is a single explanation for his distress. Many have sought answers and found only grief." "I am not here to chase ghosts," Alara said. "Only to help." Katrin nodded. "Let us hope you can." The door opened then gently, and Mrs. Brand stepped inside. She looked from the cradle to the two women. "Breakfast is being served downstairs. Miss Wynne, the Viscount asks that you join him after the child is settled." Alara blinked. "Me, madam?" "Yes. He wishes to hear how the night passed." Katrin gave her a sympathetic glance. "Do not falter. His temper is not sharp, but his sorrow makes him impatient with false comforts." Alara straightened. "I will speak honestly." As she prepared to follow Mrs. Brand, she let her gaze drift one last time toward the music box. Its carved surface rested in perfect stillness. Yet she could not shake the feeling that something inside was waiting, watching, or listening. And whatever had stirred within it last night was not done. The manor's lower floor carried a different kind of silence from the nursery. It was not tense or fearful, only hollow, as though the house had grown used to speaking softly after months of mourning. Alara followed Mrs. Brand through a corridor lined with tall windows. The morning light had begun to spread across the glass, but it appeared muted, as if reluctant to enter fully. They reached a set of double doors. Mrs. Brand opened one with careful grace. "His lordship will see you now. Speak clearly. Avoid unnecessary detail unless he asks for it." Alara nodded and stepped inside. The dining room was long, with high ceilings and pale walls touched faintly by the winter light. A single place was set at the head of the table, though enough chairs remained for a dozen guests. Alara imagined they had once been filled each morning, Lady Isolde smiling beside her husband, the household bustling with sound. Now only a faint echo of that life remained. Lord Rowan stood near the hearth. His coat had been changed, though shadows of fatigue lingered across his features. He turned when she entered. Something unreadable flickered in his eyes. Questioning, wary, and perhaps grateful that she had not fled after her first night. "Miss Wynne," he said, gesturing toward a chair near him. "Sit, you have my leave." She obeyed, folding her hands in her lap to keep them steady. Rowan regarded her with an intensity that made the air feel smaller. "Nurse Catherine tells me you bore much of the burden last night. Speak plainly. How did he fare?" Alara inhaled, choosing her words carefully. "He woke several times, my lord. Each time seemed to follow a small tremor in the house. A chime, a soft click, sounds most children would not notice." Rowan's jaw tightened. "Yes, that is consistent with what we have endured." "He soothed once held," she continued, "though his distress was strong at first." "And you were able to quiet him?" "For the most part." Rowan looked down, his hand curling against the arm of his chair. "You speak as though you expected worse." Alara hesitated. "I have tended many children, my lord. None have reacted to sound in such a way. It is as if noise is not merely discomforting to him, but painful." The Viscount closed his eyes briefly, a flicker of torment passing across his face. His mother used to hold him close whenever the bells rang. He would settle quickly then after... He exhaled, the sentence dying away. After she was gone, something changed. Alara did not interrupt. Grief had its own rhythm, and Rowan spoke as a man who rarely allowed his heart a voice. When he looked at her again, his expression was sharper. "Tell me what you observed that others have not." She met his gaze. "Something stirred in the nursery last night, a sound so faint I nearly dismissed it. But Arlen heard it instantly." Rowan leaned forward slightly. "What kind of sound?" "A delicate vibration," she said. "Not from the walls, not from the wind." The Viscount's eyes narrowed. "And from what source, then?" Alara swallowed. She had not meant to mention it so soon, but the truth pressed at her. "The music box, my lord." His stillness was immediate. Even the fire seemed to hush. "Say that again." "I heard a chime from the table where it sits," Alara said. "Barely audible. Yet it woke the child in terror." Rowan's shoulders stiffened. "The box has not been opened since her passing." "I understand," she said softly, but something within it moved. Mrs. Brand, who had remained near the doorway, shifted slightly, though she said nothing. Rowan rose abruptly and crossed the room, staring out the tall window as though struggling with something unseen. His voice, when it returned, was strained. "That music box," he said, "was played every night she lived." Alara inclined her head. "The nurse told me. She believed its melody protected him," Rowan continued. "She would wind it until it sang softly enough to lull him to sleep. After she died, I forbade anyone to touch it because—" He stopped again, and this time he did not attempt to finish the sentence. Alara understood without needing the explanation. The memory of a loved one could cling to the smallest object. Opening the box might have been like opening a wound. But the silence surrounding it now felt far more dangerous. Rowan turned back to her. "You propose that it stirred of its own accord?" "I cannot explain it fully," she admitted, "only that the sound was undeniable, and Arlen responded as though it pierced him." Rowan walked slowly toward the fireplace, one hand braced against the mantel. The light painted his expression with fragile shadows. "I cannot bear to lose what little remains of her," he said quietly. "But if that object harms my son—" He did not finish. He did not need to. Alara rose slightly from her seat. "My lord, forgive me if I overstep. I have no wish to speak out of turn. But the box may not be what it appears." Rowan looked at her, searching for something solid to hold on to. What do you mean? Objects can change hands. Mechanisms can shift. Something inside may have been damaged or altered without anyone realizing. I only suggest we consider every possibility before assuming the worst. A long silence stretched between them. Finally, Rowan nodded once. You will keep watch for any further disturbance. Yes, my lord. And say nothing of this to the rest of the staff. Whispers have plagued this household long enough. I understand. He moved toward the door, pausing beside her. Miss Wynne? Yes, my lord? He studied her, not suspiciously, but with a troubled hope. If there is something amiss in that nursery, I need someone who will see it without fear. Alara met his gaze. Then I will look. Rowan straightened, something resolute settling into his posture. Good. When he wakes, bring him to the nursery window. He tolerates the morning light better than the lamps. It calms him. I will. The Viscount left the room, closing the door softly behind him. Mrs. Brand approached at last. Her expression held a weight that had not been there earlier. You have stepped into deeper waters than you may realize. I intend only to care for the child, Alara replied. The housekeeper shook her head gently. At Dunmare, caring for him is never only that. Alara walked back through the corridor alone, the morning light thin upon the floor. Each step she took felt heavier than the last. The image of the music box lingered in her mind. Carved wood, delicate patterns, still as a sleeping heart. Yet something inside it had woken. And it had not been the child's imagination. When Alara returned to the nursery, the corridor outside was unusually quiet. The hall lamps had not yet been lit, leaving most of the space in a muted gray that blurred the edges of every object. She paused at the threshold, listening. No sound stirred beyond the door. Not a cry, not a rustle. Even the fire inside seemed to sleep. Nurse Katrin stood near the cradle, smoothing the sheets with slow, thoughtful motions. Her expression, usually firm, appeared softer in the subdued morning light. He is still asleep? Alara asked as she stepped inside. For now, Katrin replied without looking up. He dozed again after you left. I have not dared move him. Alara approached quietly. The child lay curled on his side, one hand near his cheek, utterly still. Peace sat upon him like something borrowed, fragile and conditional. The silence in the room had changed since dawn. It felt less gentle now, more watchful. Alara sensed it before she fully understood why. Her gaze drifted toward the table beside the cradle. The music box remained exactly where it had been, yet something about it seemed altered. The carved surface caught the light in a way she did not recall, as if certain grooves, fine and deliberate, had deepened overnight. She moved a step closer. Katrin noticed. Do not touch it, Miss Wynne. I had no intention to, Alara said softly. But did it always look like this? Like what? The carvings. They seem sharper. It is only the light, Katrin said, though her voice held an edge of uncertainty. Objects shift with the day. Alara did not argue. She only studied the box in silence, feeling again the faint warning that had threaded through her thoughts since the night before. Has anyone been in here besides us? She asked. No, Katrin replied. Only the child. Alara's attention snapped back to the cradle. He did not wake. And move anything? Katrin gave a humorless smile. He is 8 months old, not a mischievous sprite. The remark eased the tension only slightly. Alara stepped away from the table and returned to the window, pulling the curtain aside by a narrow inch. Pale sunlight seeped through the gap, falling across the floor. Dust motes glimmered faintly, tiny drifting stars. She often brought Arlen here to calm him. She hoped he would greet the light kindly when he woke. She turned to speak, but the child stirred before she could form the words. His lashes fluttered. A soft sound, half sigh, half question, escaped his lips. Alara moved closer, scooping him into her arms before the tension in his limbs could gather into fear. There you are, she whispered. Welcome back. His small fingers clutched at her sleeve. He pressed his cheek to her collar, warming instantly to her presence. She walked him toward the window, offering him the gentle glow of morning. He blinked at the brightness, squinting slightly but not crying. That is better, she murmured. Only light. No sound to trouble you. He focused on her lips as she spoke, as though reading comfort from the shape of her words rather than the sound. His dark eyes glistened with a depth that felt older than 8 months. Katrin watched them quietly, her arms folded. He accepts you easily. Some children take weeks to warm. I think he wants to be understood, Alara replied, even if he cannot say so. She paced slowly, letting him observe the room. His gaze drifted across the shelves, the curtains, the wardrobe, and finally toward the table near the cradle, toward the music box. The instant his eyes landed on it, his body went rigid. Alara, Katrin whispered, alarm softening her voice for the first time that day. Step back. But Alara was already doing so. Arlen's breath quickened against her shoulder. His little hands closed into fists. It is all right, Alara murmured, turning him away from the table. You need not look at it. He buried his face in her dress, trembling. Katrin shook her head slowly. He recognizes it, I think. Even if the lid stays shut. Alara kept rocking him. If it frightened him, why was it left so close to where he sleeps? Because she placed it there, the nurse said. And the Viscount will not have it moved. He clings to the last arrangement she made. Alara looked again at the carved box. It sat in stillness, deceptively innocent. Nothing about it indicated malice, except for the way Arlen reacted, as though something unseen reached out from it and disturbed his fragile sense of safety. What exactly happened the night Lady Isolde died? Alara asked quietly. Katrin hesitated. You should not start digging where the soil is still soft. I am not prying for gossip, Alara replied, but if it helps me protect him. The nurse sighed, rubbing her brow. It was a difficult labor, far longer than expected. She never recovered her strength. But she held him, not even an hour old, and told the Viscount that he must promise to care for the child as she would have. Then she... Katrin's voice faltered, but she forced herself onward. She asked him to wind the music box for the boy. It was the last thing she requested. Alara felt the weight of that truth settle across her shoulders. No wonder Rowan had been unwilling to touch the box again. It was bound not only to grief, but to a dying wish. And after that night, Alara said, Arlen changed? Katrin nodded. He became alert to every noise. Even the smallest knock would startle him, as if the air itself had sharpened. Alara looked down at the child. His lashes were still damp with the remnants of earlier fear. She stroked his back gently, whispering soft assurances. He is so small, she murmured. Too small to bear so much. Katrin's gaze flicked toward the music box. Some burdens are inherited without choice. The remark hung in the air, like drifting ash. Alara resumed pacing, letting Arlen observe the curtain's slow movement, the shifting patch of light, the gentle sway of her rhythm. His trembling eased, but the moment she passed near the table again, even several steps away, his tiny frame stiffened once more. His breath hitched against her shoulder. It is not right, Alara whispered. He senses something. Katrin rubbed her arms as if cold. You are not the first to say it. The admission startled Alara. Someone else noticed? One maid, Katrin said quietly. Months ago. She claimed she heard a faint note come from the box even when no one touched it. The nurse lowered her voice further. She left the house the next morning, said the child's cry felt like it echoed inside her bones. Alara shivered, though the fire had begun to warm the room again. Did she tell the Viscount? No. She said he would not believe her. She feared being thought hysterical. Alara did not respond. She merely looked down at the child she held, small, warm, deeply vulnerable, and felt a resolve settle into her chest. I will not leave, she said softly. Katrin studied her. Many have said the same. But I did not say it to sound brave, Alara replied. I said it because someone must stand between him and whatever disturbs him, even if I do not yet understand it. The nurse did not speak, but something in her expression acknowledged a fragile respect. Arlen slowly turned his face outward again, peeking from the safety of Alara's shoulder. His gaze drifted around the room until it once more brushed the box. This time he did not cry, though he tensed like a creature that knows the shape of danger even without seeing its teeth. Alara whispered to him, I will not let it harm you. The box remained still, but its silence felt deliberate, as though listening, waiting. And Alara knew, with a certainty that chilled her, that the child's terror was not imagined. It was a warning. By late afternoon, the nursery had grown dim again. as though the sky had chosen to brood over Dunmere rather than brighten it. Rain pressed against the windows with quiet persistence, and the fire in the grate burned low, only occasionally sparking as if reluctant to disturb the fragile stillness. Nurse Katrin had stepped out to fetch more linens from the washroom down the hall, leaving Alara alone with Arlen. The child slept lightly in his cradle, worn out from the morning's anxieties. His breaths rose and fell in delicate patterns, each one a small triumph against the fear that shadowed him. Alara stood beside him for several minutes, making sure his rest remained undisturbed. Only when she was certain he had slipped deeply into slumber did her gaze drift, slowly, almost reluctantly, toward the table near the cradle. The music box sat in its customary place, silent, still, perfectly ordinary in shape and size. And yet it tugged at her thoughts with a weight she could not ignore. She glanced at the nursery door. No footsteps sounded in the hallway. No one was near enough to witness a closer look. A harmless curiosity, she told herself, nothing more than attempting to understand the object that so clearly unsettled the boy. But curiosity had rarely felt so heavy. With careful steps, Alara approached the box. She did not touch it at once. Instead, she leaned close enough to observe every detail without disturbing the air around it. The carvings wrapped around the lid were intricate, leaves, vines, and a small blooming flower repeated with near-symmetrical precision. At first glance, the ornamentation seemed purely decorative. Yet the more she studied them, the more she noticed how sharply some edges were cut, how certain grooves looked newer than others, as if reworked or reinforced recently. Her gaze traveled lower. That was when she saw it, a small lock tucked just beneath the lid's edge, shaped in an odd elliptical form. Not the kind used in typical music boxes. It looked almost custom-made, fashioned to hide rather than to guard. Alara frowned. "Did she lock it herself?" she whispered under her breath. Lady Isolde had been gentle, loving by all accounts. Would she have needed a lock on a simple nursery tune? She bent slightly to see the box from another angle. A thin line, a seam hardly thicker than a whisper, ran along the bottom edge. It was a gap so fine she might have mistaken it for part of the patterning if she were not searching for abnormalities. A hidden compartment? The notion set her pulse quickening. Her fingers hovered above the wood. Only a touch, she told herself, nothing more. A light press would not betray her curiosity if someone returned. Arlen shifted faintly in the cradle. Alara paused, watching him. His eyelids fluttered, then stilled again. His breathing steadied. She let her fingertips descend, soft as falling dust, along the side of the box. The wood was cool, smoother than age alone should have allowed. She traced the faint seam. Nothing happened. She exhaled slowly and pressed a little lower. Still nothing. But near the base, almost hidden beneath a swirl of carved vines, there was a tiny protrusion in the wood, barely noticeable unless one sought it. Her thumb brushed it lightly. A tiny click answered her. Alara jerked her hand away, startled. The box had not opened, but something inside it had responded. A tremor, faint, metallic, shivered through the wood. Another tremor followed, softer but undeniably present. Her breath caught. "What are you?" She leaned closer, listening. The third vibration came slower, like a mechanical heartbeat starting to wake after too long a silence. The fourth was sharper. And the fifth, Arlen cried out. It wasn't a simple, unsettled whimper. It was a cry of pain. Alara spun toward the cradle. The child writhed beneath the blanket, his hands curling, his face contorting in distress. His mouth opened wide in a silent scream before the sound finally tore free, raw and desperate. His entire tiny body convulsed with a fear that felt too deep for someone so young. "Arlen!" she gasped, rushing to him. She scooped him up at once, pulling him against her chest. His small fist beat against her shoulder, desperate to escape from whatever sensation pulsed through him. "I'm here," she whispered frantically. I'm here." "Hush, little one. Breathe, just breathe." His cries sharpened, then broke, then sharpened again. Alara rocked him urgently, her own heartbeat nearly as frantic as his. It took several minutes, aching, breathless minutes, before his sobs began to quiet. Even then, he trembled violently, clinging to her as though clinging to life itself. "Oh, my poor boy," she murmured, stroking the back of his head. "What did it do to you?" She didn't look at the box right away. She waited for Arlen's sobs to weaken into hiccups, for his breathing to steady, for his small fingers to cling less desperately to her collar. Only when she could feel his heartbeat slowing from terror to exhaustion did she dare glance over her shoulder. The music box was still closed, still quiet. yet its silence felt like the pause after something deliberate. Alara tightened her hold on Arlen. "That was no accident," she whispered. She crossed the room, carrying the child to the safest corner away from the table. She sat on the small cushioned chair, letting him melt into her arms. The moment his cheek pressed against her chest, his trembling eased further, though now and then a small, broken sob escaped him. Alara kissed the top of his head gently. "That box," she murmured, her voice low and fierce, is not what it pretends to be." She rocked him slowly, her thoughts spiraling. Someone had altered the box. Someone had added a lock where none should have been. Someone had hidden a mechanism that responded to pressure, even a light touch. And it was that hidden mechanism, not random noise, not imagination, that caused such violent pain in the child. Arlen whimpered again. Alara held him closer. "I will not let this continue," she whispered with quiet conviction. "Whatever hides inside that thing, whatever purpose it once served, it is hurting you now." The rain outside softened to a low hiss. Shadows on the walls lengthened as the afternoon dimmed towards the evening. Alara kept her eyes fixed on the cradle, then on the box, then back to Arlen. Her voice, when it returned, held the first note of resolve she had not dared voice before. "I will find out what lies beneath that lid," she said, "and I will not be afraid to uncover the truth." The music box did not stir again, but its stillness no longer felt dormant. It felt like resistance. Evening settled over Dunmare with a weight that pressed against the windows as though the sky wished to fold itself across the manor. The fire in the nursery had burned low, throwing long, wavering shadows across the walls. Alara sat in the chair nearest the cradle, holding Arlen against her shoulder. His breathing had grown softer after the earlier incident, though a trace of unease lingered in the occasional shiver that passed through him. The room was quiet now, so quiet she could hear the ticking of the hallway clock through two closed doors. Quiet enough that every time she blinked, her gaze drifted back to the music box on the table, its carvings dim in the fading light. She had no intention of touching it again, not tonight, not while Arlen rested in her arms, but the memory of the hidden mechanism and the boy's sudden terror circled her thoughts without pause. Her heart beat faster each time she remembered the trembling inside the wood. A soft sound stirred at the nursery door. Alara straightened. Lord Rowan stepped inside. He paused on the threshold, his eyes adjusting to the low glow of the room. His hair was slightly damp, as though he had just come in from the mist outside. His shoulders seemed heavier than they had been in the morning, and his expression carried the weight of someone who had faced an argument with himself and lost. "You are still here," he said quietly. "Yes, my lord." Rowan walked deeper into the room, his steps slow, careful. His gaze drifted immediately to Arlen, small, warm, curled against Alara's shoulder, before moving to the table where the box rested. "We do not keep long watches at dusk," he said. "Most maids would have left their post by now." Arlen was unsettled, Alara replied, her voice gentle. "I did not wish to leave him while he still trembled." The Viscount's eyes darkened, not with anger but with something more painful. "He trembles because the world is too sharp for him." Alara hesitated, then asked softly, "Are you certain it is the world, my lord? Not something within this room?" Rowan inhaled sharply. For a moment he said nothing, only the fire crackled. Then his gaze settled on her with unmistakable warning. "You have been here only a day, Miss Wynne. Do not allow superstition to cloud your judgment." "I am not speaking of superstition," she said. "I am speaking of the child's reaction. He recoils from something near him." Rowan's jaw tightened. "You are suggesting the box is at fault." "I am suggesting," Alara replied carefully, "that we should not dismiss what stands before us simply because it carries sentimental weight." Rowan turned away abruptly, pacing several steps toward the window before stopping. The dim light caught the edges of his profile, sharpening every angle of grief. At last he spoke. "You know nothing of what that box represents," he said, voice strained. "Nothing of what it cost to leave it untouched." Alara held Arlen closer, her tone soft. "Then tell me, my lord." Rowan's breath faltered. For a moment she thought he might refuse, might turn and leave the room without another word. But something in the stillness of Arlen's sleeping form seemed to tug at him, weakening the walls he had kept standing for 8 long months. He rested a hand on the back of the chair across from her, eyes fixed on the carpet. "It was a wedding gift," he said at last. "From Isolde's grandmother." She cherished it beyond reason. Each night, she wound it herself, even when her hands trembled with exhaustion. She said its melody was the first sound she remembered from childhood. The fire crackled again, soft, respectful. On Rowan's tongue, Isolde's name felt like an open wound. She played it for the boy from his first night, he continued. He would lie in her arms while the tune softened into quiet. She believed the melody wrapped him in safety. I thought the same. Alara watched him closely. And the night she passed? Rowan's voice dropped to scarcely more than a whisper. She labored far longer than she should have. The midwife warned us. He stopped, swallowing the memory down. When she knew she had little time left, she insisted, that I wind the music box so he would sleep one last time with the song that had comforted her. Ilara's heart tightened. She died before the melody finished, Rowan said, his voice breaking around the words. I could not bear to hear it again. When the hours of mourning passed, I closed the box myself. I told the staff never to touch it. He finally looked up at her. So yes, Miss Wynne, I am aware of the pain that object carries, and I will not have it treated as a specter lurking in the dark. Ilara nodded slowly. I do not think it is a specter. Rowan's brows drew together. Then what do you think? A tool, she whispered. Something that has been changed or damaged. Something that harms Arlen in ways it never harmed her. Rowan's eyes flashed. Hurt, anger, confusion all tangled into one. All. Are you accusing someone of tampering with it? I accuse no one, Ilara said gently. But the child suffers, my lord. That is undeniable. We must consider every possibility. He stared at her, breathing unevenly, torn between disbelief and the unmistakable echo of fear. Finally, he turned away again, facing the fire as though seeking counsel from its unsteady flame. You are bold, he murmured. Most would tread more lightly in a house weighed down by grief. If boldness protects the child, Ilara said softly, then I will bear the weight of it. Rowan's head lowered, not in defeat, but in recognition. Arlen shifted in Ilara's arms, letting out a small sigh. Rowan turned at once, instinct overcoming all hesitation. His gaze softened at the sight of his son resting so peacefully against her. You care for him, Rowan said quietly. I do, Ilara answered. And I fear for him. He inhaled deeply, letting the truth settle heavily in the room. You think I should consider the possibility that the box harms him? Yes. And yet you know how it pains me to admit it. I do. Another silence passed, deep, thoughtful, fragile. Then Rowan straightened, his shoulders no longer as tense, though his eyes remained troubled. I cannot promise to accept your suspicions, but I will not forbid you from observing what you must. Ilara blinked, surprised. My lord? You heard me, he said, softer now. I will not command you to ignore your intuition. Only tread gently, for his sake, and for hers. He nodded toward the cradle, toward the space where memories lived more loudly than breath. Ilara bowed her head. Thank you, my lord. Rowan paused at the doorway before leaving, his voice barely more than a murmur. If you learn something, tell me, even if it wounds me. And then he stepped into the dim corridor, closing the door quietly behind him. Ilara looked down at Arlen, small, fragile, sleeping with his cheek pressed against her heart. I will find the truth, she whispered, for you. And perhaps for him as well. The music box remained silent across the room, but its stillness vibrated with the promise of secrets yet to surface. Night had settled thickly over Dunmare by the time Ilara found herself alone again in the nursery. Nurse Katrin had retired early, claiming an ache in her joints, and Mrs. Brand had gone to help extinguish the lamps along the west corridor. Only the faintest glow from the fire lit the corners of the room, turning shadows into soft shapes that swayed with each flicker. Arlen slept in his cradle, exhausted from the earlier distress. His small chest rose and fell in quiet, steady cycles. Each breath reassured Ilara that she had a little time to face the object she had avoided since the afternoon. The music box. It sat as it always did, but now she saw it differently. Its quiet presence had taken on weight, as though it were a sealed mouth waiting to reveal something unwelcome. The thought prickled her spine, but she forced her feet to move. She checked the door once more, shut firmly. No footsteps echoed in the hallway, no soft tread of the Viscount's boots, no rustle of Katrin's skirts. There would be no better moment. Ilara crossed to the table, cautious yet resolute. She did not reach for the lid. Instead, she lifted the box itself, surprised by its heaviness. The wood felt dense, unnaturally so, as though something inside weighed it down beyond its modest size. She set it gently on her lap as she sat in the low nursery chair. The carvings along the sides brushed against her fingertips, delicate patterns of leaves intertwined with blooming flowers. But now in the dim firelight, the vines seemed less decorative, and more like a veil concealing what lurked beneath. She inhaled. Then she turned the box upside down. The bottom panel, though smooth, held faint scratches, thin, deliberate marks as if someone had once pried or nudged at its edges. Most would overlook them, but Alara had tended children long enough to recognize when something had been handled with secrecy. She traced the tiny seam she had found earlier. The gap was almost invisible, but her fingertips knew where to feel for it. "There you are," she whispered. Her thumb pressed lightly along the lower edge. Nothing moved. She pressed harder. A subtle shift. A faint click. Arlen stirred in the cradle. Alara froze, listening for any rise in his breathing. When he settled again, she returned to the task. She slid her fingernail along the seam. To her surprise, the panel lifted slightly beneath her touch, only a hair's width, as though resisting at first, then yielding with reluctant permission. A stronger push revealed a narrow opening. Inside it, glimmering faintly in the dim light, was a thin metal ring, no larger than a coin, yet heavier looking than its size suggested. It rested inside the hidden compartment as though it belonged there, but the smoothness of the recess around it told her it had not been part of the original design. Alara's heart quickened. She lifted the ring carefully. It was warm, not in the way wood absorbed heat, but warm like something that had recently vibrated or held energy. Faint patterns traced its circumference, small grooves etched into the metal, forming a design she did not recognize. "What are you?" she whispered. A faint, lingering hum pulsed from it, so soft she nearly doubted her senses. Arlen whimpered. Alara's head snapped up. The child twisted in his sleep, his small fingers curling, his breath catching. Even from across the room, he tensed in response to the object she held. "It's all right," she murmured, placing the ring down immediately. "I won't bring it near you." The moment her fingers left the metal, the hummed vibration subsided. Arlen relaxed. Alara stared at the ring. Whatever its purpose, it clearly affected him, even at a distance. And if such a tiny object could provoke such fear, what had it done each time the box stirred on its own? She placed the ring beside the box and reached into the compartment again. Her fingertips brushed something papery, a folded sheet. She drew it out slowly, half expecting it to crumble, but it had been preserved surprisingly well. It bore faint smudges of oil along the edges, as if handled repeatedly by nervous hands. She unfolded it. The first thing she saw was a name. Marla, the former nursemaid. Alara's breath caught. Marla had left the manor months before Alara arrived, abruptly, and without proper explanation. Rumors in the servants' quarters said she had been dismissed for instability, though no one had agreed on the cause. Alara read the trembling words. "If you are reading this, then perhaps the truth has begun to reveal itself. The child cannot be allowed to see the world as it is. The signs are clear. I have watched him since the night of Lady Isolde's passing. Spirits cling to him. They cling to the house, and they must be calmed. The ring will muffle the visions. The hum will keep the spirits from reaching him. I hid it in the box because it is the only object that held both mother and child. Do not remove it." Alara stared at the ink, her pulse thundering. Visions? Spirits? A muffling ring? Marla had believed she was protecting Arlen, but her efforts, misguided, superstitious, fearful, had only inflicted suffering. The metal ring was no charm. Its vibration caused Arlen agony, and Marla had inserted it herself. Alara looked at the box again, horror stirring beneath her ribs. "You did this," she whispered, not an accusation, but an aching disbelief. "You thought you were shielding him, but you were hurting him." She read the final line. "If the child still cries, more must be done. I will return when the signs demand it." A chill coursed through her. Marla had not acted under orders. She had acted alone, driven by delusions or by terror. She had left, but the note suggested she had never intended the work to end. Alara folded the letter with trembling fingers and tucked it inside her apron for safekeeping. She cast a glance toward the cradle. Arlen slept quietly again, unaware of the weight of the revelation. She turned the ring over once more, the grooves catching the fire's glow. "No more," she whispered. "You will not harm him again." She slid the metal ring back into the compartment so it would no longer rest exposed. But she left the bottom panel unlocked. Her next steps required discretion and courage. Tomorrow she would show the Viscount. Tomorrow the truth would begin to emerge. But tonight, she pressed her palm over the closed box. "I will protect him," she breathed. "Whatever comes." The fire flared suddenly as though answering her vow. And the music box, though closed, seemed to shudder in silence. Morning broke gray, blue, and uncertain, the kind of light that softened edges rather than sharpened them. Alara had slept little. The letter hidden beneath her pillow weighed more heavily than if it had been carved of iron. Arlen awakened early, restless but not crying, and Alara soothed him through the slow hours until Nurse Katrin arrived to take him for a brief wash. Only then did Alara slip from the nursery, the folded letter pressed against her palm. She found Lord Rowan in the small study overlooking the east garden. He stood near the window, staring out across the fog-draped hedges. The rain from the night before had left droplets clinging to every leaf like cold beads of glass. He turned at the sound of her footsteps. "Miss Wynne?" His brow furrowed instantly. "You look troubled." "I must speak with you," she said, her voice low but firm. "It cannot wait." Rowan gestured her inside. "What has happened?" Alara closed the door behind her. "I discovered something last night." He stiffened. "Concerning him?" "Yes, my lord." She reached into her apron and withdrew the folded letter. "Concerning him and the box." Rowan's face hardened, but beneath that sharpened mask she glimpsed a flicker of fear. Fear that she had found confirmation of the suspicions he dreaded most. "Explain," he said. Alara placed the letter on his desk. "I found a hidden panel at the bottom of the music box. Inside it was a ring, metal, etched with strange grooves. When I held it, the child reacted, as though in pain." Rowan's jaw clenched. "You opened it alone?" "I did not open the lid, my lord. Only the underside compartment. Arlen was asleep, but the moment I touched the ring, he cried out." Rowan stared at the letter, but did not reach for it. "Show me." She unfolded it with steady hands. The inked words lay exposed against the wood grain of the desk, Marla's trembling confession. Rowan's expression shifted as he read. Confusion, then disbelief, then a slow, simmering dread. When he finished the final line, he stepped back as though struck. "This is madness," he breathed. "Spirits? Visions? Muffled by some contrivance?" He shook his head sharply. "She was dismissed for instability. I was told she had grown erratic, but I never imagined—" Alara kept her voice calm. "She believed she was protecting the child. By injuring him?" Rowan's voice rose, not in anger at Alara, but at the memory of the woman who had once cared for his son. Why would she place anything inside the box? Why would she meddle with something that belonged to Isolde? "I do not know, my lord, but the ring's vibration harmed him. That much is certain." Silence fell. Heavy. Suffocating. Rowan pressed a hand to his face. "Marla, I trusted her. She served in this house for years." "You were grieving," Alara said gently, "and she preyed upon her own fears." He dropped his hand, eyes storm-dark. "I must confirm this. Someone else must read the letter." He strode to the door and called into the corridor. "Mrs. Brand, come at once." The housekeeper arrived quickly, her steps brisk. But when she saw Rowan's expression, and Alara's pale one, her composure faltered. "What is wrong, my lord?" "Tell her," Rowan ordered Alara quietly. "She has served long enough to know what truth looks like." Alara handed Mrs. Brand the letter. The housekeeper took it with trembling fingers, her eyes scanning line after line, her face drained of color. "Marla wrote this?" Her voice wavered. "Yes," Alara said. Mrs. Brand sank slowly into the nearest chair. "I feared—" She stopped, swallowing thickly. "I feared something was amiss with that woman toward the end. She spoke of omens, claimed she saw shadows following the child into his cradle." The housekeeper looked stricken. "But this is beyond superstition." Rowan's voice sharpened. "You never told me she behaved in such a way?" Mrs. Brand flinched. "You were grieving, my lord. The house was in turmoil after her ladyship passed, and Marla left so suddenly." "You dismissed her?" Rowan demanded. "She left before I could," Mrs. Brand whispered. "She vanished in the night." "But she did not leave alone." Rowan stopped pacing. "Explain." Mrs. Brand clutched the letter. "A man came for her. Tall, severe. He carried papers bearing the seal of the council. He said he was authorized to inspect the child." Rowan stiffened. "Who?" "I do not recall the name fully," Mrs. Brand said, voice shaking. "Something like Hawthorne. The silence that followed was colder than the fog outside. Rowan's eyes narrowed. That man had no permission to examine my son. He insisted, Mrs. Brand whispered. And he knew enough details that I believed him. He said he needed to verify the child's condition after his mother's death. Ilara felt a chill crawl up her spine. And did he inspect him? She asked. Mrs. Brand nodded miserably. Yes, he checked his eyes very thoroughly. Too thoroughly. Ilara clutched her arms. And afterward? He left with Marla, the housekeeper said. Both of them disappeared. Rowan stepped back from them both, as though the room itself had closed in on him. Ilara's voice barely rose above a whisper. My lord, this was no accident. He swallowed hard. Someone used my grief to get close to my son. Before anyone could respond, a soft tapping sound broke the stunned quiet. Tap, tap, tap. Ilara turned. A folded slip of paper slid beneath the study door, slowly, as though pushed by a cautious hand. Rowan strode forward, snatched it up, and unfolded it. The message was short. Jagged ink. No signature. You should have left him blind. Mrs. Brand gasped. Ilara's breath seized. Rowan's hand shook for the first time since Ilara had known him. He crushed the note in his fist. This house, he said through clenched teeth, is no longer safe. Outside, a wind rose suddenly across the garden, rattling the window panes like fingers clawing at glass. Inside Dunmere, the shadows deepened, and the threat against the child was no longer hidden. It was at their door. By midday, Dunmere had changed. What had once been merely somber was now alert, tightened, braced for something yet unseen. The Viscount's commands had swept through the manor with swift precision. Guards doubled at the entrances, servants ordered to keep to the main corridors, every door checked and locked. Even the garden paths, once walked daily by Lady Isolde, remained empty under the cold drift of morning fog. Ilara sensed the shift the moment she stepped into the hallway. The maids spoke in whispers, their eyes darting toward the windows as though expecting a face to appear in the mist. Rumors passed beneath breath. A stranger prowling the estate, a shadow moving along the hedges, a threat delivered in folded paper, yet no one dared say Hawthorne's name. Ilara quickened her steps toward the nursery. She found Rowan there, bent over the cradle, his expression severe, yet beneath it pulsed a fear he was fighting not to show. Arlen lay beneath a fresh blanket, dozing fitfully. The boy stirred at Rowan's presence, then whimpered softly, sensing the unease filling the room. You received my note, Ilara said. Rowan straightened, turning toward her. Yes, I have given orders that no one enters or leaves without my knowledge. His jaw tightened. And I have sent for McLaren. The physician? He has known this family longer than any living man, Rowan replied. He will not be deceived by tricks or contrivances. Ilara nodded, though her gaze drifted toward the music box resting in its usual place. Its stillness felt deceptive now. Too still. Too quiet. As though lying in wait for the smallest moment of opportunity. Rowan followed her gaze. Has it moved again? No, she whispered. Not yet. They waited in uneasy silence until hurried footsteps sounded in the hall. Dr. McLaren entered without ceremony, a tall, silver-haired man with a grave face etched by years of medical judgment and sleepless nights. He carried a small case of instruments and nodded stiffly to them both. You said the child is in distress again, he began. He reacts violently to certain sounds, Rowan said. And Miss Wynne believes, correctly I fear, that something in the nursery contributes to it. McLaren approached the cradle. Arlen stirred, blinking up at him with anxious eyes. The doctor's features softened briefly. Poor child. He appears exhausted. Rowan's shoulders tightened. Something is hurting him, and I intend to find it. Ilara guided McLaren toward the table. The music box. I discovered a compartment beneath it yesterday. There was a metal ring concealed inside, warm, humming. When I touched it, Arlen screamed as though in agony. McLaren's head snapped up. A ring? In a music box? Yes, Ilara said, and a letter from Marla. She claimed it protected him from visions. The doctor's face shadowed. That woman always had an unhealthy imagination. Rowan stepped closer. There is more. Last night a man left a warning at my door. McLaren's expression went pale. Warning? You should have left him blind, Rowan recited. The doctor closed his eyes briefly as though absorbing a blow. Then the danger is real. Arlen whimpered softly, sensing the rising tension. Ilara moved to lift him from the cradle, but the child's gaze drifted toward the music box before she could reach him. And in an instant the peace within him shattered. A cry tore from his throat, sharp, raw, piercing. He shrank against the cradle wall, twisting away from the table as though something invisible clawed at him. His hands trembled violently, his legs kicking as if to escape a pain she could not see. Alara rushed forward, gathering him into her arms. "Easy, darling. Hush, hush." Rowan's face hardened. "Enough," he said, turning toward the box with decisive force. "We open it now?" McLaren nodded. "We must see what was placed inside." Alara carried Arlen to the farthest corner of the room, rocking him as his cries broke into shuddering sobs. Meanwhile, Rowan and the doctor approached the box. Rowan hesitated only for a heartbeat before lifting it. "Alara," he asked, "show me where you found the panel." She pointed from across the room. "Along the base, right side. Press gently along the seam." Rowan followed her instructions. Within seconds, a faint click echoed. He lifted the underside panel, revealing the hidden compartment. McLaren leaned in. Good heavens! Inside lay the metal ring, small, darkened, etched with faint grooves that glimmered like fractured lines. Rowan lifted it with trembling fingers. The moment he did, a faint vibration pulsed through the air. Barely perceptible, yet unmistakable. The doctor recoiled slightly. "That is no ornament." Rowan studied it. "What purpose does it serve?" McLaren took the ring, lifting it near his ear. "There is a mechanism, minute but active. Some sort of oscillating device. It generates a vibration, unnatural, and certainly harmful to an infant's senses." Rowan's fist tightened. "Someone crafted this." "Yes," McLaren said grimly. "This was engineered. Not broken. Not old." He held it closer to the firelight, observing the etched grooves. "This is recent." A deep, cold dread settled in Alara's stomach. Rowan's voice dropped into a harsh whisper. "Someone designed this to hurt my child." McLaren nodded solemnly. "Not by accident." Arlen, still sobbing into Alara's shoulder, hiccuped painfully. She pressed him close, whispering comfort. "It's all right, little one. They're taking it away. You're safe." Rowan approached her, the ring clenched in his palm. His eyes softened when he saw Arlen's tears. "Give him to me." Alara hesitated, only because she feared he would tremble more, but Rowan stepped closer with unexpected gentleness. "Please." She surrendered the child. Arlen whimpered, but Rowan held him carefully, steadying him against his chest. The boy's cries dulled, then weakened into small gasps, then into the soft whimpering of a child too tired to protest further. "You see?" Alara whispered. It was hurting him. Rowan closed his eyes, pressing his cheek against his son's hair. "I should have seen it sooner." "No," Alara said softly. "You were grieving. Grief blinds even the strongest." He opened his eyes, dark, fierce, and focused. "But you saw. You were the only one who did." McLaren approached, with the ring wrapped in a cloth, to dampen its vibration. "We must study it, determine its full purpose, and who would have reason to use it," Rowan nodded. "Hawthorne." Alara felt the name cut through the air like a blade. "He examined Arlen," Rowan continued. "He left with Marla, and now someone demands the child remain blind." A chill swept through the nursery, colder than any winter wind. "We must be cautious," McLaren said. "Whoever did this may still be watching." Rowan tightened his hold on Arlen, who now had grown quiet. His face nestled against his father's coat. "Let them watch," Rowan whispered. "They will learn that I am done being blind myself." He looked at Alara then, truly looked at her, with a depth of gratitude she had never seen in him before. "You have saved him," he said quietly, "and I do not forget debts of that kind." The fire cracked sharply in the grate. Outside, thunder murmured across the horizon. And inside Dunmere, truth had finally struck its first clear note. Night lay gently over Dunmere, no longer heavy with dread but softened, almost tender. The air inside the nursery carried a stillness Alara had not felt since her arrival, an unbroken peace, delicate as spun glass. Arlen slept in his cradle, his breaths soft and even. No shivers, no sharp flinches, no cries tearing through the silence. For the first time since she had known him, the child looked free. Alara sat nearby, watching him with a mixture of disbelief and relief. The harmful ring lay now wrapped and sealed in a locked drawer in McLaren's study. The mechanism beneath the music box had been removed entirely. The hidden device could no longer pulse or vibrate. There was nothing in the room to hurt him. He slept, truly slept. His tiny fist rested beside his cheek, relaxed entirely, as though his dreams had finally ceased to frighten him. She felt tears prick her lashes, not from sorrow, but from a warmth she didn't trust her voice to express. A knock sounded lightly at the door. She rose and slipped outside, closing it with care. Rowan stood beneath the faint glow of a single hallway lamp. His hair was slightly tousled, as if he had run a hand through it too many times out of restless emotion. The stern set of his shoulders, however, had eased. He looked years younger for the relief that now softened his features. "He sleeps?" Rowan whispered. Alara nodded. Peacefully. The Viscount released a breath he had been holding since the day his wife died. A fragile softness entered his eyes. "I thought I had forgotten what that looked like." Alara folded her hands before her. "He will sleep like this again, my lord. You have taken away what pained him." "No," Rowan said quietly. "You did." He said it not as praise, but as truth. Alara felt warmth rise to her cheeks. "I only noticed what no one else had reason to look for." Rowan stepped closer. No one else dared look. A silence passed between them, gentle, full, unbroken. "Come with me," he said. "There is something I must say, and I cannot speak it in a corridor." He led her toward the east balcony where the door opened to a sweep of cool night air. Above them, the sky stretched in a quiet scattering of stars, the moon a pale arc behind drifting clouds. The gardens below glowed faintly, silvered by starlight. "This was her favorite place," Rowan said, stepping toward the stone railing. "Isolde used to stand here at dawn holding Arlen, pointing out the first birds in the hedges." Alara listened without interrupting. "She believed morning light healed things," he said softly. "She said it warmed the soul where the world had chilled it." He turned, leaning against the railing, studying her with an expression that made her pulse shift. "Tonight I feel something I feared I would never feel again." Alara's breath stilled. "Hope," Rowan said. The word hung in the air, gentle as a falling leaf. He stepped toward her. "You saved him. You saved the one piece of her I still have. You saw truth when my grief blinded me, and you stayed when others walked away." "I stayed because he needed someone," Alara whispered. Rowan shook his head slowly. "No, you stayed because you are braver than anyone I have ever known." Her throat tightened, but she didn't look away from him. "You should know something," he added quietly. "When Isolde was dying, she begged me not to raise him alone. She feared the world would harden me, and perhaps she was right." He exhaled, the confession trembling between them. "But you—" He paused, gathering the words like fragile things. "You softened what grief had turned to stone. You cared for him with a tenderness that felt like sunlight after too long in shadow." Alara felt the cold night wind brush her cheeks. Her heart beat so strongly she wondered if he could hear it. "My lord," she whispered, "I only did what any decent person—" "No." Rowan reached for her hand, not forcefully but with a cautious reverence, as if asking permission without words. "What you have done is not ordinary, nor are you." His fingers closed gently around hers. "Alara," he said, her name breaking softly from him. "I find I cannot imagine this house without you. I cannot imagine him without you." The wind hushed. The garden below seemed to still. Rowan stepped closer, voice low, vulnerable, in a way she had never heard. "I do not want a cold alliance. I do not want a marriage arranged out of fear or convenience." His thumb brushed her knuckles. "I want a woman who sees what others overlook, a woman who listens past silence, a woman who held my son as though he were her own." Her breath quivered. "I want you," he finished quietly. Alara's lips parted, but no words came. Rowan swallowed. "If you can bear my grief, if you can accept the shadows that remain in this house, will you stay? Not as a servant, not as a nurse, but as my partner, my equal." His voice trembled despite his attempt to steady it. "My wife." Alara felt her vision blur. The stars above seemed to shimmer, as though the universe leaned closer to hear her answer. All the hours she had spent in this house, the fear, the tenderness, the weight of the child in her arms, gathered into a single ache of belonging. She had come as a servant, but she had found something she never expected, a purpose, a child who clung to her heartbeat, and a man who had learned to hope again because she existed. "Yes," she whispered, the words soft but firm. "Yes, my lord, I will stay." Rowan closed his eyes briefly in gratitude, then pulled her into an embrace, gentle, careful, yet full of awe. Alara felt his breath against her hair, a breath that trembled with relief and something deeper. When he finally drew back, his hand lingered at her cheek. "Tomorrow," he said, "Arlen will wake to a world without pain, and to the family he deserves." Ilara smiled through tears she did not bother to hide. Then tomorrow will be a better day than any he has known. Rowan clasped her hand once more and led her back toward the nursery. Inside, the cradle glowed softly in the lamplight. Arlen slept on, peaceful and safe. For the first time, not because silence shielded him, but because love did.